Hello, everybody. It is great to be here one more time today. My name is Gary Fowler. I'm the CEO, president, founder of GSD, Get You Done Venture Studios, a premier AI and quantum venture studio located in the heart of Silicon Valley. I'm a 17-time serial entrepreneur with several unicorns under the belt. I was on the original management team at Click Software, which was sold to Salesforce for $1.35 billion, and also Eva.ai, an HR tech company that I co-founded with Dr. David Yang. We believe at GSD that intellectual capacity is evenly spread, but opportunities are not. Today, GSD is in 73 countries around the world, and over 180 companies have joined GSD. So with that, I'd like to introduce my incredible guest, John Pritchard, Dr. John Pritchard. He's the CEO of Radiant Logic. He's had an extensive background from companies like IBM and Adobe and Okta to Cheyenne Mountain. Oh, we want to talk about those things. So with that, I'd like to bring John on board. Hey, John, how are you doing today?
Doing fantastic, Gary. I really appreciate the opportunity to join your show today.
Yeah, no, it's great having you. No, you've had an extensive career and, across major tech companies. So I talked about IBM, Adobe, Okta. But then you went to Cheyenne Mountain. How was that up there, actually? That is like a whole different deal. Now, was it interesting or not? And don't say anything you're not supposed to talk about. But how did you like that? How was that experience in your career?
It was a fantastic experience. I often joke that I have worked for progressively smaller companies over my career. And so I started with really big ones. And Cheyenne Mountain was very, very interesting. I don't think a lot of people realize that it's a U.S. and a Canadian joint operation, right? So it is North American Air Command. But those systems were built very long time ago. They're very difficult to maintain and modernize. And that was really what I was there sort of looking at, is like, how do we plan a modernization of technology that's super critical, built for purpose, but they're trying to embrace like new technology.
Was it interesting?
Oh, I learned so much. More in the planning, less in the sort of like technology choice, but when you've got a mission critical system that you're trying to change while it's running, like how do you plan for that? How do you test for that? All those things. It was a huge learning experience.
Your PhD research focused on open innovation and AI ecosystems. Myself, I started, by the way, on the AI side, actually, when I was in graduate school over 40 years ago. So I was on the mainframe computer and I said, what does this system equal the capacity of the human brain? And I was fooling around in BASIC with a program called Fritz. So this is like, it wasn't anything about AI, but I started to think about it then. It was quite interesting. But, you've gone down through this experience. When you did your open innovation and AI ecosystems, can you break down what does it mean for our listeners, and what does actually open innovation and AI mean to them? What does it mean for startups, and what does it mean for corporations?
Yeah, so this research was really, really eye-opening for me, and all the things you're talking about, Gary. I remember those two expert systems, sort of our original sort of algorithm development back in the day. So in I guess 2018, I'm deep into some research in the ecosystem around AI development. So less of like the actual technology or a specific large language model, but like who are all the people that are participating in these things. And I'm doing a bunch of study with the Linux Foundation at that time. PyTorch had been donated. They've got this collaborative organization called the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And I'm at one of their events and I'm watching these companies come and present the work they're doing in open source. All right. So open source is a style of open innovation. I'm sure your listeners are all very familiar with that. And I'm struck by the brands that are up there talking. So it's not the Microsofts and the Googles and the Salesforces that you might expect, although they're there. But you see like American greeting cards. You see Cleveland Hospital from Ohio in the US. And I'm like, wow, there are a lot of companies outside of the mainstream, what I'll call tech zone, that are doing a lot in this open innovation, open source sort of field. And so I did a bunch of study, a big 5-year panel of all these firms that were participating. And I compared them with their competitors in their sectors through a bunch of different sort of measures. So like, were they more profitable? Did they grow? And it turned out in almost all cases, those that were participating outperformed their peer group. It's fascinating, right? So so I'm trying to dig into this a little bit, and I get into another ecosystem, which your listeners may be familiar with, which is called Hugging Face, which is really trying to curate I'll call it model developers and data owners to try to find a place to meet in the open, and reran a lot of these findings and started to see the same type of a pattern. And so the theory was like, hey, there's a lot of knowledge that's being shared in these circles, right? You may be using the actual open source project that gets constructed, but you're probably getting a lot more value with the people you're meeting. And we call those knowledge spillovers in the academic space. But it was a very fascinating study that I saw play out in sort of two different veins of technology.
So we called, so I told, there's three things: operational expertise, networking contacts. And if you have these tools in front of you and you've got the access to the capital, any company can become a unicorn. I've been going down through and done it, right? And 44 years of building companies in Silicon Valley myself. And, you see that the spillover that you're talking about, that's really critically important, because when you start to go down through and use the tools to be able to find things, to develop relationships, to use those relationships to build your company, and exponentially changes things, right? I'll tell you a little story. This will be interesting for you. So last year in October, I got diagnosed with stage 3 kidney disease. And in August of last year, my dog got stage 4 cancer.
Okay.
I actually had built multi-agent large language models 2 years ago, before many people even thought about it. In fact, I started one of the first generative AI companies in 2016, pre-transformer models, with Dr. David Yang from Silicon Valley. And I was a CEO and co-founder of the company. I almost said founder, but co-founder of the company. But one of the things that we found is that there's so many superpowers that we can have. So I built the anti-cancer vaccine, discovered how to do it for my dog. And within 2 weeks after doing that, we built a vaccine. It cost about $20,000 in total, with all the surgery and everything else done, to put my dog in complete remission of stage 4 cancer. Now, it was quite interesting, because I started thinking to myself, okay, this could be applied to humans, right? And it is being applied in different ways to humans. Then I got stage 3 kidney disease. I went to my doctor and he said, there's no cure for it. And I said, well, I don't think that's probably the case. Then I went to my concierge doctor, longevity doctor, and he said, well, there are some things, but I'm not that familiar with them. So what happened is I started down this journey. I put it into my multi-agent. I have 14 agents working as a team. And I said, what do I need to do? And it told me mesenchymal stem cells could help. And this is what exactly you need to do. And this is who you need to see. Now, remember, this is a leap of faith, right? It's kind of like Indiana Jones, The Last Crusade, with Sean Connery and Harrison Ford. I had to take that leap of faith. And anyhow, I did it. My kidney disease completely went away. I had 100 million stem cells put in my body.
Wow.
Completely went away. All the wrinkles went out of my face. Everything changed. Cognitively, my abilities, I didn't benchmark it, so I can't tell you exactly, but I can say that the things that I do know, the kidney disease, these tools give us superpowers, and all kinds of ways, nefarious ways and good ways. And if we use those in a good way, and I like, when I went down through your company, you talk things like identity observability and why that's a game changer. You talk about identity security. It's critically important, right? We don't even know who we're talking to these days.
Oh, man, so one incredible story, Gary. It's I think it's a fantastic example of how this is a democratizing knowledge, right? Because now it's so broadly available and it can be applied more broadly than we've had, where we had to rely on experts. There's been a lot of technology innovations I've seen in my career. This one, I think, is a very large one, because it is resetting how we approach and use technology. And to your point, for good things and for bad things, right? So the bad actors are able to leverage exactly, say, times of tech for nefarious purposes. And part of what we're really focused on in the cybersecurity market, and identity specifically for me, is how do we reduce what we call the attack surface that these bad actors are sort of looking for, so that you don't have a big compromise of IP or internal data.
And that's a problem, because the challenge is infobesity. In your world, you got about 300,000 items in your personal cloud. The entire web in 1996 was 257,000 websites. You, John, have more information in personal cloud, the entire web. The problem is John's trajectory following the same trajectory as the web. By that, I mean doubling every year. In 5 years, you're going to have 10 million items. Here's one thing. I just got to do that. And I did this to the head of the quantum lab at Harvard. I've done it to the lead author of the Nobel. You know, you're a really smart guy. You've got your doctorate in business. You know, you've done AI for a long time. But how many times the last 2 weeks somebody said, "Hey, John, I sent you a message. Did you get it?"
100%.
Now, this is crazy, right?
It is.
I sent it to your email. Which one? Oh, one of the 7. Or did you send it to WhatsApp or Telegram? Here's the strange thing, John. People are using tools like WhatsApp as a filter because they can't read their mail anymore. In psychology, you know, this is called learned helplessness. You get so much stimulation, you just stop. Garcia.
And I feel like we keep adding another escalation communication app. You're like, okay, if you really need to talk to me, reach out on this one, right? This is
Yeah, but it's
like
crazy because the tool, you know, so back in 2016, I actually built some of these things with my company. So Findo and Eva. So if you look, I see I raised $7 million and attacking the problem. You know, we were too early and people didn't understand it. We had to pivot the company a couple of times and worked on remote workforce management because it just was too early. But this infobesity problem is a big deal. When you talk about identity observability, the problem is on the planet Earth today, there's about 176 zettabytes of data. If you took CDs or DVDs and stacked them one on top of another, it would go 128 times between the Earth and the moon today, growing at 70% per year. This is nuts. So we are everywhere. We don't even know where we are, and there could be multiple copies of who we are, and they may not be us.
So,
right?
So we refer to this, what you're calling obesity in corporate land as sprawl. You've just accumulated a bunch of stuff, and it's necessary to run some part of your business, or it was built by some team that used to be there that maybe isn't, but is still doing something that maybe you're not completely sure about. All huge risk in terms of an attack surface, right? That's exactly what bad actors are looking for. Some misconfigured or undermanaged system that they can use to come into the network or access to your data or impersonate someone in the company.
Yeah, no, and so we talk about, by the way, that infobesity, I started writing about that back in 2016. I actually had seen the movie or read the book, Future Shock by Alvin Toffler, 1974. And when I was in high school, and I remember that, and I never forgot it. So infobesity is the #1 killer, and it is really crippling people, and it's crippling companies. Do you think we're really going to have we're going to have people that are insanely wealthy and people that don't have anything, and there's going to be very few people in the middle, because what's happening is that people that understand the data, know how to use these tools with superpowers, are going to do incredible things, and people that don't are going to be left in the dust. And it's already happening. You can already see the disparity.
For sure. I mean, we'd seen this before, though. Like, look at decentralization of computing and PCs when they came out, and the people that were early adopters, both individually and companies, like they created extensive wealth and ownership and market command because they were first to utilize these technologies, because these aren't going away. And to your point, I think it's a rethink of how we work. Is it a tool we use, or is it something that we use like as a part of my team? This whole agentic AI space that's coming up, I think, is really making this now actionable. Before then, we had this sort of interesting technology, and we've been trying to look for how do I apply it? I think now we're starting getting some of the building blocks.
So I'm going to dive in. So with hybrid and multi-cloud environments becoming standard, how does Radiant Logic simplify complex identity management scenarios?
So I was giving a talk a couple months ago, and we were talking about this idea of sprawl. Like, why do I have all these things, these systems in most companies? And there's a sort of interesting, I'm a researcher, so you'll appreciate this, Gary. There's like an interesting sort of history story here where you mentioned mainframes, right? So we had this sort of centralization happen in the 70s and 80s as the Cold War is finishing and mainframes are hitting. And then we sort of go through this decentralization period as PCs come along, and we have these sort of like office level computing and sharing going on. Windows sort of hits the market, and we sort of centralize everything again. Web services come out, SaaS starts to launch, a little bit more decentralization. What I've noticed is every time we go through those periods, we don't quite move off of the things we had before, and you just leave this long trail of things. So when we talk about hybrid environments in my company and for the companies we work with, that's what we mean. You've just got a lot of capability that you're using to run your business. It's may not be things that you want to keep, but it's debt that you were taking a long time to retire. Some of it's on premise, some of it's in the cloud, some of it's SaaS systems, and somehow you've got to manage all that stuff.
You did a recent blog post and you talked about the identity security paradox, right? Could you elaborate why more tools actually create more blind spots?
It's sort of counterintuitive, specifically in the identity and cybersecurity space. You think if I put it more defenses, then I must be safer. But what ends up happening is companies are acquiring these different sort of niche bespoke tools that have what they can see just within the tool itself. And lacking any type of large scale visibility of all these assets I just talked about, it will give you the false assumption that I'm protected. But the gaps exist. They don't see all the systems. They don't maybe talk to all of these hybrid or these legacy tech systems you got running around. It says you've got all green dashboards and you still go through a compromise.
What challenges do companies typically face in managing identity, data, and specifically AI-driven solutions? And here's the thing. Do you think that because we're using some of these AI-driven solutions today, it's actually creating more issues in terms of security?
Well, for sure. And if you're close to agentic AI, you'll notice the biggest debate right now is authorization and authentication. Like, how do I make sure that these things are allowed to do whatever they've been asked to do, right? Forget what they're able to do, but like, should you be doing that? And this is exactly what we do with humans in the enterprise. So most organizations are dealing with a class of human identities. So this is the people that work in your company, could be your employees, could be your consultants, contractors, third parties you're using. And they've got an equally large set of what we call non-human identities. And then that used to be things like, hey, I've got this thing that runs every night and it's on a schedule. So it needs some way to be authorized to run. So it's got an identity defined for it. And it's usually got some cryptic label that's attached to something. Those have to be managed exactly the same way. Like they have a set of permissions and entitlements. Someone's got to review those periodically. Agentic AI is really, really compounding that side of the equation, because as I get into these smaller specialized agents, then they have an identity attached to them. They have a set of permissions of things they can do. They also have to be governed somehow and periodically. And if those are built into the SaaS systems that you're using, is that inside your governance process? Does it fall outside your governance process? So there's a lot of complexity, I think, right now around governance, authorization on the agentic side as it relates to identity and cybersecurity.
So, okay, you're gonna have to go down through and put this in layman's terms, but let's talk about AI enhanced queuing optimization. So, you tell us a little bit about that and why is it transformative in identity management?
So we did a recent blog post and a contribution to open source, back to my earlier observation on how we're using, I'll call it data science techniques to determine the order of which to do a workflow or process. So in the cyber world, definitely in identity, you've got a set of things that have been highlighted that maybe need to be looked at or remediated. So think of these as like a red, green, orange sort of dashboard, right? So then the next thing you're like, well, which things should I work on first? And some of these things maybe impact other things. So we worked on a mathematical model to understand where the priority should sit in a changing world, appreciating these things are sort of changing real time. And how do I weigh the impacts of things as I look at a simulation, if you will, of if I were to change this, what would it also sort of impact?
This sounds like ontology and knowledge graphs and VAE and all that, right?
It's using techniques we've known for some time. It's applying them in a more classic way, as opposed to saying, hey, I've got a generative AI thing that's giving me all the answers. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. So let's go down through. I want to go back to yourself, right? You step into the role of CEO of Radiant Logic. What's been your biggest learning curve? And how's your previous roles? You've had some where you had leadership positions. I remember you were working with I think the CEO of IBM, actually. You were a CTO of IBM. So leading the company now, what's been your biggest learning curve? And how have your previous roles really helped you to fill that?
So I'm a former product engineering leader and a bit of a minority in terms of progression into CEOs. Historically, you often find CEOs ascend from either the field or sales organization, or they've come out of like the finance or operations side. I definitely see that changing more in the tech space for sure, as we look at sort of product-led growth and product strategy. I had just amazing opportunities to work with great companies. I was at IBM when sort of web services were being determined and figured out, and the standards around that. I joined Adobe before subscription was a thing, and we were one of the first companies at the time to set up this model of SaaS-based subscription. I remember having these huge debates at Adobe at the time. We're talking about Photoshop, which was several $1,000s for a license, and moving that to $9.99 a month. And people are just like, what are you guys doing to the company? But it ended up starting a whole new way of sort of thinking and delivering software so that you can repeatedly update things. The CEO position for me is really stretched my skills. You now get to see how all the specialty functions interrelate. What is the role of marketing? What does product marketing do versus corporate marketing? How do you package a product? How do you talk about it? And I think that's hugely valuable as you sort of look at the interplay of all the things that you have to make investments on and make decisions. I will say, though, that I've had a common refrain I've heard from new CEOs that says, congratulations and I'm sorry, because it's often described as a bit of a lonely job.
Something, honestly, I've been doing it so long. So when I started my first company, it was over 40 years ago, you really get to like it. And the situation is, you're right on the cutting edge and you're changing things. I remember I had a conversation. So Scott McNeely is one of the founders of Sun Microsystems, and direct conversation with him. He said, always go to areas you fear the most, you're going to learn the most. So I remember on my side, one of the things I did is I lived over in Russia for 12 years. So I didn't speak any Russian at the time. I was one of the co-founders of the first accelerator in Russia. And, I got to interface with people like John Chambers when they would come over, Schwarzenegger, Condoleezza Rice, people like that. I would get to meet people that I normally wouldn't get to meet. Wouldn't happen today with all the dynamic politics out there, but at the time it was incredible. And what happens is you understand that intellectual capacity, John, is evenly spread around the world, but opportunities are not. Like in Africa, 1.3 billion people, 54 countries around the world. And sometimes we forget there's so many other people out there, and we can impact their lives we talk about democratization of opportunity. If this agentic AI is used in the right way for the good, and we should, because nothing good's going to happen, we destroy our planet, right? And we don't have a place to live. We should figure out how to be able to use this for the betterment of all of us, because it's not about one, it's about everybody, right? And I'm not saying I'm saying from the heart. I'm not saying it from a politician standpoint, but we really got to go down through and use these tools to help our lives. Like the thing with my dog and cancer. I mean, now if I can do it, I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania. I'm not a smart guy like you. I'm just a poor country boy. And now if I can do that, and I can go down through and change things with, the umbilical cord stem cells in me, what happens? Imagine the possibilities. People with Alzheimer's, people with Parkinson's, people with cancer, all kinds of things can change. Seriously, it's nuts.
It's crazy.
And, we got to go down through, guys just like yourself that have this knowledge. One of the things that happens, because I have the privilege of meeting a lot of people just like all over the world, just like you, right? And just like me, we can do kind of things. We gotta use these tools to be able to help us. You're right. There's a lot of nefarious people out there, but there are a lot of good people too.
So I'm super excited about. I think the big thing for me is this availability of knowledge has somehow been unlocked, and your stories are a great example of that, right? So you had some specific contextual information that you added to a body of knowledge, and then using some of this inferencing power, you came to some suggestions that actually worked out. Hugely impressive, but very valuable. One of my big takeaways from working in academia for a while is we do a lot of research in academia that gets published, but it isn't consumed, I'd say, deeply. And so the knowledge is sort of locked away. These technologies, in my mind, allow you to really democratize that stuff, right?
You can mine it. You can mine the stuff. I agree. Here's another thing that's happened to me because of part of it's because of mesenchymal stem cells, because it changes your cognitive abilities a lot. actually. But the other thing that was amazing is using agentic AI tools. So I don't know about you, but now I don't have to think about a question. If I want to know how many planets in the Milky Way galaxy, I ask it how many galaxies in the universe, 2.7 trillion estimated. I go down through. I learn faster. And what happens in our life when you start to learn like that, the neurons and synapses, it starts changing things because you can figure out, you don't have questions anymore. You just start having answers.
So I've incorporated this into all of my daily life. I know there's a lot of talk right now about it. Is this sort of reducing our ability to do, critical thinking and decision making? But just like the conversation you and I are having right now, that is the dialogue I tend to have when I'm brainstorming a topic or researching a topic. And to your point, I come to a better decision. It's still largely influenced and driven by me, but having someone I can like ideate with, hugely powerful.
Well, that's part of it too, because what happens is you start to go down through when you use these tools as much as we do, right? I'm in there 3-4 hours a day. You start to ideate with people like yourself in the same way you're ideating with agentic AI. I'm using 14 as a team, by the way. So I have a team, multi-agent, multimodal large language model. In fact, it's here with me right now, right? So it's with me all the time, literally with me right now. And so these tools, in fact, it did the research on you. So as we're going down through this, it taught me about you.
That's crazy. It's fantastic. I gave a recent talk in the cyberspace about the idea of teams. And I think you're hitting on the big next frontier, for at least for my market. We've traditionally used AI as like, I'll call it like a super soldier. There's one of them, it's sort of like all powerful. And we found all the edges where it isn't quite perfect. I see the space definitely with agentic where you've got squads and they're specialized. And because they're specialized, they're better at the job. They're not trying to be trained on everything. But the team of the future is a human AI team, of mixed players, not unlike an online game where you've got different classes that you're playing with.
So I've gone down through with some of the frontier technologies. So I have doctors from Yale, MBAs from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all over the place. And one of the things we're looking at, I'm particularly interested because of my own situation, is tools that can go down through and when you can have the opinion of many doctors, right? Part of the problem we have is medical infobesity too. The doctors are overwhelmed. And it's just like when I went down through and went down through the vaccine, the doctors didn't know, veterinarians didn't know that this stuff existed. Because it's not that they're not smart, they're geniuses, but they just didn't have access to it.
They're just like us. Like I can only consume so much at a certain pace, right?
That's right. Well, at least for today. It's going to change. Anyhow, listen, we're coming to the top of the show. Closing thoughts. And if you want to stay on for a few minutes and talk, I've got a few minutes. It'd be great to share some ideas with you. But closing thoughts and how do people get a hold of you?
So super excited to be at this space this time. My company focuses on data, and data is becoming the big unlock for whatever we end up doing in AI in the future. I do think it's a movement towards teams as opposed to being replaced and replacement of human capacity. But what a great time to be back in technology again.
Now, thanks for taking your time, John. How do people get a hold of you?
Find us at radiantlogic.com.
Sounds great. And thanks to all my audience for joining one more time. My name is Gary Fowler, and I'm your host. Stay happy, stay safe, and stay healthy, and have an incredible weekend. We'll be back to you again soon with another exciting edition. Thank you.